My name is Mia Smith Bynum. I'm an associate professor of family science here at the University of Maryland in the School of Public Health. I've been here about 2 years, and I'm a clinical psychologist by training. I have several areas of expertise. I'm a child clinical psychologist in particular, and so in my primary area is parenting, and I spend a lot of time doing research on parent-teen communication about difficult topics. My primary area of research right now is a topic called racial socialization, which broadly speaking is how parents talk to their kids about issues of race. And I'm particularly interested in how African American parents do that.
So the Trayvon Martin killing has raised a lot of dialogue, questions, conversations about the racism that still exists in the United States. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about the racism that children, particularly black boys and teens, face on a regular basis, and how this impacts their health and their lives?
Okay, that's a really good question. In our current debate, when we talk about the word racism, it's almost become like a four-letter word of sorts, and because of that, it kind of gets tossed around a lot and doesn't have a lot of meaning anymore. When we think about racism, it's different from prejudice in that racism is really about prejudice plus power. And so people of color, African Americans, are the target of beliefs about being inferior or less than other human beings based on skin color. And our cultural stereotypes about African Americans, particularly black boys and men, are really toxic. And the longer I do work in this area, I believe that it's a particular kind of racism that even black American women don't encounter on a daily basis. The stereotypes that black males are criminal, I mean, even the phrase young black male conjures up images of danger and then one needed to protect oneself and to not be in their personal space. And so when an act happens, a suspected criminal act, our cultural beliefs about African American men and boys are like automatically supported. And so it makes it very hard for these individuals as well as their family members to advocate for themselves in that context. And so I think it's when the Trayvon Martin killing actually happened, the cultural stereotypes that this kid did something wrong, they didn't kick in, I think, as automatically because of the photo. The kid, his innocence just jumps off of the page. Whether you're looking on a web page or a TV screen, you see that this is just a kid. And then the particular circumstances of the incident, I think, speak to all human beings. And so we kind of see skin color drop away, and people just feel like parents, like aunts and uncles and brothers and sisters and classmates, and they are just horrified by the particulars of the incident. And I think that's why we've seen the national outcry that we have. But I think in terms of the role of stereotypes, the way that the media coverage has begun to shift and focus on some of the mistakes that people have said that Trayvon made when he was alive, that you sort of see people that the currency that the stereotypes have makes it easy for people to argue that the shooting was justified in some kind of way. And that's how we see American racism work, in my opinion.
What kind of tools can you give parents in terms of, how do they help their children to make sense of something like this, to navigate the world given, the difficulties that they will encounter?
Okay. It's been such a ubiquitous media event that I'm sure some parents that their kids have learned about it through other venues, or either the TV happened to be on when a news story came on, the kid's sitting right there, and then you kind of have to have a conversation about it. In the ideal circumstance, I think you have to pay attention to your kid's personality and temperament and make sure that they're not so sensitive that they just can't process this information. And in those cases, I protect kids up until maybe definitely 8, 10, 11, 12, like in that arena. Once they become preteens, they are beginning to fit the physical stereotype of young black males, and you kind of don't have the luxury of not talking about it anymore, but do it in an age-appropriate way. So shield very young kids from it as much as you can. If your kids have been exposed, answer their questions about it without giving them so much information that it frightens or scares them. And I think parents are the best judge of sort of where that line is. For older teens, there's been a lot of media coverage about the black male code. I think that that's something that a lot of parents do, particularly a lot of fathers talk to their sons about these issues, but also mothers as well, in terms of, what do you say if you get stopped by the police? Regrettably, we've talked about physical dress and how certain garments that you wear can place you at better risk. The sad thing is that what you wear should have no bearing on whether or not you get a shot down in the street by a civilian because you fit a particular stereotype. But that is the reality, and I think if we don't prepare kids for that reality, they can't respond in the circumstance, and they may respond with their youthful innocence in the way a lot of kids do, but it's just not a luxury that a lot of African American kids have, particularly boys. And so once they begin to age into, in terms of, puberty hits, they get taller, their muscles are going to get thicker, and they start to look like young men. Now you've got to teach them how to manage the stereotypes that people are going to have about this. And so in terms of the killing, I would talk about as much of the specific facts as you think your particular kid can handle. And then I would try to put it in some type of historical context. And I would talk about the treatment of African Americans throughout history and sort of try to connect those dots for kids a little bit more to say this isn't just sort of a random incident, but that this is part of a legacy, unfortunately, of American racism that kids have to really try to figure out how to manage. I think as long as that is packaged with the other good stuff that parents do, making sure that they're in positive activities, that they have positive peer relationships, that they have a good attitude towards school, that as long as those things don't occur in isolation and they occur in the context of a good parent-teenager relationship, that it becomes part and parcel of how you should parent anyway on any day, that any difficult topic that comes up, we're talking about sexuality, drug use, and peer pressure, you're going to have an honest but age-appropriate and realistic conversation about those things, and this is just one example of that.
One of the areas of emphasis in the School of Public Health is addressing health disparities, racial and ethnic health disparities. Can you talk a little bit about, from a mental health and perspective, what are the challenges that particularly African Americans face in terms of health disparities, and in your work, how you can address building resilience in Black youth, which is your particular area?
Sure. Well, one of the things that we know about, particularly encounters like direct encounters with racial discrimination, which is someone treating you differently based on skin color, but there's a whole line of research based on being in certain racial spaces, which is a function of sort of institutionalized racism, living in segregated communities where the neighborhood quality is not great, the schools are not great, the environmental quality in terms of walkable communities, etc., is not equivalent to what we see in predominantly white communities. So we sort of know that it's linked to things like heart disease and breast cancer and depression and things of this nature. And what I'm especially interested in is understanding what can parents do to kind of protect and prepare kids. Promotion of a positive racial identity and a sense of connection to other African Americans is really, really key. That we keep seeing that finding show up over and over in a lot of different studies, and we're seeing it with very young kids as well as school agers and teenagers as well. So that piece is really important, and it's counterintuitive to our current narrative about race, because what most people say today is be colorblind, like don't see skin color and then everything will be fine. And that's really actually not the way that it works. That for people of color, that what you get from that is a sense of who you are as a person, because most of the time when you're in predominantly white spaces, there's no acknowledgement of your cultural background at all, and you have to sort of package yourself in a way to make yourself fit and be palatable in those spaces. You're too ethnic, you get a lot of pushback, and people are either uncomfortable or they think that you don't belong in that space. So teaching kids to be proud of themselves, as well as how to negotiate mainstream cultural spaces effectively, like those two skill sets I think are just really, really important.
What are some of the ways that Black parents and other parents of color can help to instill a positive racial or ethnic identity in their children?
Okay. I think that the first thing is to acknowledge it right up front that these realities are there, that I think many African American parents kind of do this already. In terms of what I would suggest based on the research is really starting to instill that early, making sure that you have positive images of African Americans in your home, whether artwork or kente cloth. These are kinds of positive things that many African Americans are familiar with, and making sure that those cultural artifacts in terms of books and other things are present in the home so that kids have a positive cultural reality on which to derive their personal identity. Starting very early, from infancy on, I think is a good thing in terms of reading those children's books to kids. As they get older, they begin to ask questions, making sure that you counter any negative messages that they may be getting from peers, schools, the media, and other circumstances, and really working to cultivate that as kids grow older. I think celebrating African American history throughout the year, as we sometimes say, I think is really important, so that kids have a counter narrative on which to base who they are, because unfortunately, and I think this is one of the reasons we have such a hard time talking about race in America, is that a lot of the history around American race relations is not taught in K through 12. So you can't assume that kids will get it in school. You have to do it at home and in church and some of these other institutions. And you have to keep that going right on through their young adulthood, because incidents will happen that will cause kids to kind of question that and shake that foundation, and parents have to be right there to support it. So making sure that race is a positive part of who you view yourself to be, and that you have positive feelings about being an African American. That's what some of the work that I and my colleagues have been able to show. I would make one additional comment about this whole colorblind thing, because it's like sort of a pet peeve issue of mine, that in terms of if white American parents want to raise kids where because no one really wants to raise a racist kid. I mean, I think that's true for most Americans, that we want to be in a society where people are racially tolerant. And I think it's the issue of seeing who people really are in terms of their three-dimensional humanity, and that includes skin color, because that's often, not always, but it's often a marker of a particular cultural or racial group. And being open to that, I think, is actually a good antidote towards racial discrimination. It's when people try not to see it in a society where everything is racialized just under the surface, makes people actually more vulnerable to practicing those beliefs, because the data show are that everyone, people of color and white Americans alike, are primed towards racial stereotypes towards all groups, and particularly African American males, that if you have a scenario where people are asked to not see race, they see it even when they're not aware of it. And so the whole colorblind thing is just kind of a myth. And so if we really want to deal with that effectively, it's really teaching people, how to understand difference and having a dialogue about that. And I think if we can do that in the context of this whole Trayvon Martin thing, that we will be a better country for it, because the country is becoming much more diverse with every decade that goes by. So.